Hello everyone. Today we're here to introduce you to the topic of psychological valuation. In this presentation we will discuss psychological factors within the field of real estate, which seems to be an underdeveloped field of study, as it is not a very common research topic. Firstly, we'll talk about consumer behavior, explain what it is, and elaborate on a model created to better understand its impact within the field. Then we will deepen a bit on one of the variables within consumer behavior, which is happiness and emotional well-being, but also how humans value their urban well-being at a general level to how it affects the economical value of real estate objects. To get an understanding of a topic like this, we conducted 5 academic journals. We'll give a simple review of 4 of them, as well as talk a little bit about the topics they investigate. I mentioned the concept of consumer behavior, which is specifically the study of individuals, groups, or organizations, but also the usage of products and services. It is the decision-making process that follows human behavior, which doesn't only concern actions, but also reasons for why actions take place. So basically we can say that it doesn't only focus on the outcome, but also on the whole process.
So in this part of the presentation, we will be looking at the psychological factors within the decision-making to buy real estate. They try to take these factors and put them into a model to better understand and predict the decision-making process. So they start by establishing or identifying the 4 factors, not purely psychological, such as financial, physical, like the location, size of the place, or which floor it's on, living environment, its proximity to services such as public transport, school, medical center, etc. Socioeconomic, which is related to maintenance costs, social relationship between neighbors, security, perception of security of the neighborhood, etc. Then they go on to speak about psychological factors, and they identified 2, which are seen as very fundamental drivers of human behavior. First, we see motivational. There we have basic motives or needs or status motives, which can be, for example, the belief that acquiring a new property will move you up in society. Then there's the emotional side of things. We have self-esteem. It is believed that people with a higher self-esteem have are more content with what they already have. Then there is the subjective well-being, which we identify as a very important factor, and we will continue to talk about this in the following slides in the presentation, and the other journals we have read. One is about how it affects the society, what the consequences of not being well within an urban setting can be. Then we look at what makes people happier on a small scale, but also on an urban scale.
The second article we chose is about how the way of living in a chosen type of area can influence the mental state and stability of a person. These studies highlighted impressively higher rates of psychological disorders such as anxiety, schizophrenia, depression, and bipolarism in people that live in urban contexts instead of people living in rural areas. This is because it seems like people's happiness decreases as we approach urban contexts. These facts weigh on the public and private health systems. As a matter of fact, more people having mental illnesses means more money spent in services to reduce this problem. But one of the main issues here is definitely a matter of lower productivity and as a consequence being excluded from work. All these factors have a huge impact on the economy of our world. In fact, reports estimated at $2.9 trillion global expense for mental disorders in 2010 that will get as high as $7.1 trillion in the year of 2030 alone. The goal now should be to level the psychological disorders rates of rural areas to the ones of the urban areas. In conclusion, we can say that urban planning and territorial organizations should seriously take into account the well-being and mental health of people, not just because it is better for people in the first place, but also because of the enormous economical cost of not doing it.
To elaborate more on which qualities that can make urban spaces valuable and contribute to urban happiness, I want to talk about an article called Urban Happiness, a context-sensitive study of the social sustainability of urban setting. This article is a study of how context influences perceived quality of urban space, and its main conclusion is that there is no single solution to creating urban happiness, and that one has to be very careful to create general rules about designing cities. What we can see in this study is that designing urban areas for people to feel good in is a highly complex task. One has to approach it with an extreme sensitivity to context, and by that I mean context in a very broad sense. I can take an example directly from the study about how context in terms of tradition can give guidelines for attractive urban spaces. Because this study is carried out in Finland, on Finnish cities and Finnish people, and the Finnish have a very strong functionalistic tradition. So the researchers found that they valued functional qualities the highest both in urban and suburban settings, which could be imagined to be a different result than one could get in many other countries. Another example of how general rules fail a specific context in urban planning and creating quality of urban spaces is the quantity of greenery. For example, it's often thought that greenery normally is a good thing, but in this study they found that in the suburbs of Finland, a high green area portion decreased the perceived environmental quality. The long distance to positive places even mediated this association. The study also suggests that they valued high quality green spaces over a big quantity. So the essence in this article is that finding universal patterns shouldn't be expected, as similar solutions can be associated with different outcomes in various contexts.
We then found and referenced another article written by Chris Foy in December 2016, where he basically tries to outline a relationship between happiness and the world of real estate. And to do so, he has to first of all try to define happiness, somehow quantify it, and he does it by considering a series of variables such as the number of rooms per person, the actual, of course, dimension of the accommodations they stay in, if these houses are rented or actually owned by the inhabitants, and other variables on where the housing actually is, such as local neighborhoods, quality of life, presence of green area, and by doing this, he manages to conduct what we can really say is an empirical study demonstrating a relationship between happiness and the real estate market, and he shows actual consequences of happiness on the markets over time. And this leads us to finally sum everything up. We know that in a field like real estate, emotions usually aren't very considered, even though we also know how big of a role they play when it comes to decision taking for humans because of how emotion driven we are, not only rational. And we tried to introduce you to this topic, to the topic of psychological evaluation, step by step. First of all, we looked into an article that tried to define psychological factors, then one that takes a look into the economic possible consequences of bad mental health, in particular comparing a urban area compared to countryside area. In Article 3 we considered possibility of the existence of some sort of design pattern in order to guarantee happiness and good mental health in the urban sphere. And finally, in Article 4, we looked into the attempt of conducting an empirical study quantifying happiness and relating it to the real estate market. All of this to evaluate the importance of considering psychological evaluation, especially in a period like now for architects and urban designers that see such a fast-paced growth when it comes to cities and overall housing.